Good evening and welcome to St. Cloud State. We are so happy that all of you are here for our District 14 Candidate Forum. And let's just give a round of applause to all the candidates up here. So my name is Cindy Fitzum, and my colleague Marla Canningator in the back there, she can wave. We are both co-coordinators of the American Democracy Project, which encourages active participation in our democracy. So we do a number of programming and events across the community in St. Cloud State. So if you are interested in learning more about that, we'd be happy to talk with you after the forum. And again, this event is brought to you by the American Democracy Project. We also, in conjunction with the League of Women Voters, the School of Public Affairs, Dean King-Banyan, where are you? Right up there. And then we also have the College of Liberal Arts, Dean Mark Springer. So again, thank you very much for coming and participating in this District 14 Candidate Forum. I will now turn it over to Sheila, who will lead the moderation here. Thank you.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the League of Women Voters of the St. Cloud area, thank you for inviting us to moderate this forum. We believe that informed citizens are the foundation of democracy. Moreover, the League does not support or oppose particular political parties or individual candidates, but does study and take positions on issues. We conduct candidate forums with the goal of listening to the candidates' views on issues that matter to the voters. I am Sheila Ferguson, a member of the League of Women Voters of the St. Cloud area, and I am honored to be the moderator of this forum. In the front row, I am pleased to introduce Susan Smith, also a League member, who will be the timekeeper. The American Democracy Project has provided the question screeners seated at this table. This forum features candidates for State Legislative District 14. Appearing tonight are candidates running to represent House Districts 14A and 14B, which are 2-year terms. In addition, candidates for Senate District 14 are here, and that seat is a 4-year term. All candidates who filed for these offices were invited to participate. We moderate candidate forums according to a standard protocol. The candidates have accepted the format in advance, and we ask that the audience participants follow the same ground rules. We'll go through some of those ground rules that you'll find on those yellow sheets. No campaign or partisan materials may be worn, displayed, or distributed in the forum room. Materials can be offered on a table provided outside. Please turn all cell phones, pagers, and all other electronic devices to silent mode. Questions will come from the audience in written form, and note cards are available for this purpose. Questions should relate to specific issues the candidates would normally address as public officials in this particular office. Questions on unrelated topics or of a personal nature will not be allowed. All candidates will be given a chance to answer all questions. Participants are asked to remain quiet while candidates are speaking so that everyone can hear responses. All applause will be held until the forum is complete. If the moderator considers a rebuttal in order at any time, the candidates may be asked to respond, and they may speak or decline. Candidates will speak and answer questions based on time allowances agreed upon in advance. Time limits will be monitored by the timekeeper. The candidates are seated first by the office that they are seeking, then in alphabetical order by last name. After opening statements, this order will be rotated in a random fashion according to this chart for each question. Starting at my right, I am pleased to introduce candidates for Senate District 14, Jerry Relph, Dan Wolgamott, and Steven Zilberg. Candidates for House District 14A are Eric Putnam and Tama Theis. Candidates for District 14B are Zachary Dorholt and Jim Knoblach. This forum will end at 7 o'clock or earlier if there are no more questions. Audience members, you are invited to write questions on the note cards. These will be collected and then sorted by the screeners. Please pass your cards to the end of the row or hand them to the people who are collecting them. If multiple questions are submitted which pertain to the same issue, the screeners will determine which ones capture your concerns clearly and succinctly. Candidates, you will each be allowed the following amounts of time: 1 minute for an opening statement about why you are running and your qualifications for this office, 1.5 minutes to answer each question, and 1 minute for a closing statement at the end of the question and answer period. The timekeeper will hold up cards. 30 means 30 seconds left. Time means finish your sentence and stop. I will begin by asking Jerry Relph to give an opening statement.
Good evening. Thank you for coming. Can everybody hear me okay? You were asked why I'm running for candidate for this office. Many people have asked the same question. I've been an attorney, small business owner, have raised 2 families in this community. The community has supported me through all of that. I felt that when John Peterson announced he was not going to run, that this was my opportunity to put back into the community. I've always volunteered and done things in the community, and I felt that this was an excellent opportunity for me to serve St. Cloud and to put something back in a little different fashion that I had before. Thank you.
Dan Wolgamott.
Hi, my name is Dan Wolgamott. I live here in St. Cloud with my wife and our 2 daughters, one of whom is joining us tonight. I work as a realtor and an assistant high school football coach. So every day I get to work directly with businesses and families and kids in our community, and I see firsthand the consequences of all the legislative gridlock. Over the past 1.5 years, I've had the privilege of knocking on thousands of your doors and having thousands of conversations. And I've learned that we have a lot of challenges facing our community. The only way we're going to do that is if we move on from the negative, name-calling politics of old and elect a leader who's going to bring positive energy to the legislative process. And that's why I'm proud to be the only candidate running for District 14 with the maturity to run a positive and issues-based campaign. I'm running to do what I do all the time in real estate, which is bring people together in good faith, find mutually beneficial solutions, and get the job done.
Steven Zilberg.
I would like to thank everyone for coming. I'm not going to lie to you and give you flowers and chocolates about how good of a person I am or my family. My wife is in the crowd, yes, but that doesn't make me the best candidate just because my wife's in the crowd. Me, where I come from, my mother and father both overdosed on coke when I was 8 and 10. I've seen what guns and drugs do and the war on drugs in Minnesota. I've seen how it affects African Americans, minorities, and poor whites. Now, a lot of these candidates sure live on the white side of the fence with good cut grass and great school. But that doesn't make a good candidate. What happens is if someone starts from the ground and works their way up, that's a good candidate. Someone who's been to 25 countries in 5 years, seen what the world is like, seen that diversity in other countries and what we can do in St. Cloud, and not the same old candidate who will say, we'll do this bill or that bill, but nothing gets done. Thank you.
Eric Putnam.
My name's Eric, and I'm running to represent District 14A. It's wonderful to see so many of you here. I'm not going to make a joke about extra credit, because I did that about a month ago, or 10 months ago. It feels like this campaign has lasted for quite some time. But it's still wonderful to see so many people here engaged in democracy, and that's especially important to me because that's what I do professionally. I'm a professor at St. Ben's and St. John's, and I teach about civic participation and public advocacy. I never really wanted to be a politician, but I remember as a kid seeing my father become involved in public life, teaching and volunteering, and I think I took some of that on sort of by osmosis. And so when you ask what's my reason for running for office, he's sitting back there, but don't look, he's super shy. The reason why I'm running for office is for my children and for our children, because I think our schools need a strong advocate fix what's wrong with them and make them better. I think our community deserves quality roads and bridges and trains. And I believe strongly that our community needs a leader to realize its unity, and I want to be that leader.
Tama, Theis.
Thank you, and I hope you're all having a good evening. It was a wonderful day. I've been in the area for 36 years. My husband and I have raised our family here. Our sons graduated from Apollo. I myself went back after the boys were in school full-time, and I graduated from the St. Cloud Technical and Community College with an associate's in microcomputer support and network administration. I did take my classes that were required here, so I came on campus and got to get the both worlds. The reason I got involved is my husband and I had a building remodeling company, and there's so much regulation, there's so many fees, there's so much that happens with the company, and it got to the point where it was really overshadowing the work. The paperwork was a lot more than what I thought it should have been. And I've always been very proactive in going to see our local legislators and even traveling to DC and seeing our federal legislators and saying, hey, you know, this really affects a lot of us. And we need to really take a good look at what we're regulating. And so that's how I got started in this. And when the opportunity came up, I ran in a special election. I decided, my husband and I actually decided that this was something that would further continue the work that we've done in the community. Thank you.
Zachary Dorholt.
Oh, good evening. My name is Zach, and I have a sinus infection, so I apologize for my nasaliness. Thanks for coming here. This is my home, and what I mean by that is I got my undergrad and one of my masters at St. Cloud State University. It's where I came to life. It's where I paid $1,200 my first semester for tuition. It wasn't that long ago. I received my undergrad in community development, worked in the telecom industry for a little while, and kind of totally shifted gears and went back to school for counseling. Here I received a master's in rehab counseling and another in marriage and family therapy. My full-time job, I'm a counselor at the Central Minnesota Mental Health Center. It's a nonprofit mental health center where I work with adults who live with serious and persistent mental illness, many of whom we refer to living as in the shadows of life. That's what drives my passion to run. That's what drives the decisions I hope to make for you in St. Paul. And thanks for coming out here on just a beautiful fall evening.
Jim Knoblach.
Well, thanks for coming, everyone. My name is Jim Knoblach, and I'm the current state representative for District 14B, which is basically the east side of St. Cloud, everything north of University Drive, and most of the north side of St. Cloud. I was born and raised in St. Cloud, went through St. Cloud Public Schools, did attend St. Cloud State for a while, but eventually graduated with a business degree from St. John's. And then I was fortunate to be accepted at Harvard and get an MBA from Harvard, and then go on to Georgetown University and get a Master's of American Government there. I'm a small business owner when I'm not doing the legislative work, and St. Cloud State means a lot to me. My parents actually met here. I was in the legislature a number of years ago. In 2006, retired, went back into the private sector, then ran again in 2014 and won. And during the years that I was here, I was the chief author of a great number of building projects, remodeling projects here at St. Cloud State, including the Wick Science Building, Riverview Hall, Brown, Centennial, Lawrence, Husky Stadium, and the James Miller Library. So St. Cloud State means a lot to me.
Back here, we would like you candidates to come a little closer to your mic, either by pulling it closer to you or sitting closer to you.
Thank you.
Okay, our first question. With state appropriations shrinking and tuition and fees rising, how can we provide access to higher education for all? And we are going to be starting with Jim Knoblach.
Well, first of all, state appropriations aren't shrinking. In fact, the last 2 years we put around $100 million into student tuition relief, which was more than went into student tuition relief the previous 2 years. And so it's, you know, we have been putting more in. I was one of the driving forces in getting a big increase in funding for, in particular, the MnSCU, now Minnesota State system, the last 2 years. But rising costs in higher education are a problem. And, you know, one of the problems is as much as, you know, you look at freezing tuition, and we did freeze tuition for this year of the last 2 years, you've also got to be concerned about the university. And I know one of the problems we had the previous 2 years when we put a blanket freeze on is that universities like St. Cloud State that had declining enrollment were really particularly hurt. And so I felt the compromise we had the last 2 years where we held people who really needed financial aid, who were getting Pell Grants, harmless. Their tuition, if anything, went down. But then we froze tuition the second year was an excellent compromise. And I hope to keep tuition under control, and we'll work toward that. And I would like to talk about this question more.
Stephen Zilberg.
Well, he missed the most important thing, which we spend millions of dollars on a hockey center, millions of dollars on food eateries downstairs, millions of dollars on renovations in other buildings. What about faculty, departments, our academic standards, where we should be focusing on education and not where would be professors or the president's favorite place to eat on campus? That's the first thing we need to answer. The second thing, financial aid and tuition, a lot of it has to do with discrimination and racism as well. The amount of times that I've had to go to financial aid and get papers of verifying your independent status or money, not once. I've heard several other Somali Americans, Hmong students, countless other minorities having to verify their parents' information, how much they make, where do they work, over 10 times. That's not fair, and that's not random selection. If someone says random selection, that's not true, that's a lie. You can't tell me picking 8 out of 10 students for Somali Americans as random selection. There's nothing random about that, besides for the financial aid office having discrimination tendencies. So I think that's where we have to focus on. Do we care about education or a brand new hockey center in which we shouldn't be athletic focusing on, we should be focusing on jobs. Can we give students a good job after they get out of college?
Jerry Relph.
Well, first of all, I think what we have to do is address the rising student debt. And one of the solutions that I would like to explore, we have many jobs that are going unfilled. There's vocations that people are just not interested in. And one of the things that I would look into would be the possibility of providing credits against student loans for time spent in a particular vocation. When I get back from Vietnam, I went to law school and I had loans from my college years. Those were deferred because I had been in the military. If I had sought to teach, I would have received further credits. So these are programs that I think we can explore to help students with the burden that they face. The other thing that I have to echo what Representative Knoblach says, appropriations are going up. I think we do have to be careful with our dollars. I think we have to examine them, but we certainly need to support our education, our higher education institutes, both the college system and the technical colleges. There are many jobs going unfilled because people don't have technical skills, welders, electricians. We need to support those programs as well, because you can come out of a technical school with very little debt and step into a $30,000 or $40,000 a year job.
Zach Dorholt.
Sure. So during the term I did serve as vice chair of the Higher Ed Committee. when I got to St. Paul, we were facing about a $6 billion deficit. We not only balanced and created a surplus, we passed the first tuition freeze of its kind. Like I mentioned before, I paid $1,200 my freshman year here. It was 1999, so there's the date. I also made $9.50 an hour working part-time. That'd be about $13.50 an hour here. So wages haven't really gone up. By the time I graduated, tuition had more than doubled. My undergrads, I could refinance, or finance rate, there was about 2% federal rate. And that, the joke was, it's the cheapest money you're ever gonna get. And now we can get used car loans for a cheaper interest rate than we can student loans. And I think that is criminal. When I was there, we froze tuition, we expanded state aid grant access, put $75 million new money into that. And we also started creating a program to help students refinance their debt. A lot of those efforts stalled. And I just want to remind you, tuition more than doubled during my undergrad years here. More than doubled. The formula used to be the state paid 60% and students paid 40%. And the reason that was because Minnesota knew that in order to make it here in the Midwest in this cold weather, we had to be the education state. So if we're going to prioritize Minnesotans, we need to get back to prioritizing education. We need to continue to freeze tuition. And when I mean freeze tuition, I mean for 2 years, not just this 1 year thing. The state works in a biennial.
Dan Wolgamott.
The average student in the state of Minnesota graduates with $30,000 in debt. And that's more than just a number. That has real consequences on students' lives. It's limiting students' abilities to buy a home, to buy a car, to get married. There are real consequences here, so we have got to, our next legislature has got to take action with this problem of student debt. I'm open to looking at building out the work that Representative Dorholt did in freezing tuition. I'm supportive of broadening the state grant program to allow more students to qualify. And I'm supportive of the pipeline program, which allows employers to get involved with training their employees while the students are still able to get credit and be in class. But if we don't take action, it's not only is it doing wrong by our students, but this hurts us as a state as an issue of economic competitiveness. Because if we don't make college tuition more affordable, we're going to lose out to states that do. And one of my top priorities is making sure that here in the state of Minnesota, we have a highly educated, well-skilled, trained 21st century workforce.
Eric Putnam.
Education is what I do. It's what I've spent the last 20 years doing in higher education, teaching people at the university level. This is one of those rare public issues where the cause is really clear, where we know what created the problem in the first place. And it came from a perspective adopted in the late 90s and early 2000s of people who thought that the schools should be run like businesses and not like schools. We had people who decided to treat students like consumers and not like students. I think that's a fundamental mistake. Education is much too important, both to our economy and to our future, and just plain morally, to treat them like businesses. Our kids are not someone's McNugget. This is not a factory. There's a reason why we do these things. So we need to make profound investments in our schools and stop treating our students like products from a factory. Now that being said, I do want to second a lot of the things that have been said before. My friends Dan and Zach, I think, both had some great ideas. The first being, one thing we definitely need to do is work on interest rates, which are excessive when it comes to student loans. And secondly, Dan's idea of the pipeline, the relationships between businesses and occupations that we need, providing opportunities for grants against your loans, I think is also a really fantastic idea. But the last thing that I would like to talk about, just briefly as I could, is investing in two-year schools. Two-year schools create an opportunity for people to expedite their path through a four-year school. In addition to being a technical program where they get to learn a skill, it's also a cheaper way to get half your school done out of the way, a more accessible way to get half of your schooling out of the way. So I think that if we can invest in our two-year programs and create a tighter connection between them and the 4 years, that's another way to help people get through college more efficiently.
Tama Theis.
Thank you. I believe that we need to continue to invest in education as we have been in higher education. And I think we've also recognized that there's a competition between MnSCU and the U of M. And this year we recognize that MnSCU doesn't get as much as the U of M. And we've made sure that we invested more into this program than we did to the U. So that is a big deal. I also believe in the partnerships with the community and with our with the folks who are going to be hiring, hopefully most of you, and keep you here in this community. What we've been seeing, I'm Vice Chair of Aging and Long-Term Care, and what we're seeing is the lack of health professionals, not just in aging and long-term care, but in many aspects. So what we've been taking a bigger look at is loan forgiveness. How can we change some things with that type of program? And what we're seeing is we're actually talking about reducing the amount of time that you need to be in a job to start taking the benefits of loan forgiveness. We're actually looking at maybe expanding it. Not only are we short nurses and doctors, but also dentists and I can't tell you how many other healthcare professionals. St. Cloud is a very big medical area, and so that is something I'm very concerned about. But I'm very happy that St. Cloud State has recognized that the community needs this. And we're looking into remodeling Eastman Hall and making that a health center. I think that's one of the best investments we can make.
Thank you. I just want to announce one more time, we had a lot of new people come in, that if you do have questions and they're on their note cards, please pass them to the ends of your rows or raise your hand and somebody will come and collect them. Thank you. And our next question. Our infrastructure, roads and bridges, water and sewer systems, and public transportation is in need of repair and upgrades. How would you address these needs, and what sources of revenue would you use? And we are going to start with Tama Theis.
Thank you. I support truly looking at what we really need to do as legislators. And there's three big jobs that we have to really look at: education, public safety, and transportation. And I don't feel like we've been taking that seriously enough in the past years. I've heard folks say, to mind comes someone from Golden Plum that talked about how much money they lose when their trucks sit on the highways because they aren't moving and they have a perishable product on them. What we need to do is make this a big priority. And how we can do that is to we've got one of the highest gas taxes in the country. What I really think we need to do is dedicate funds. And we need to take the taxes that are going to be coming from automobiles and dedicate that to transportation. We have to do this. This is one of our constitutional duties, and we haven't been doing that. Driving back and forth to St. Paul, who wants to drive in the right lane? No one, because it's a shakedown cruise. It's bumpy. What we need to do, yes, light rail is part of it, but we also need to make sure we take care of our roads and bridges because we really haven't been putting the money that we should have in those entities for a long time. Thank you.
Eric?
Well, I think infrastructure is incredibly important. It's something we've been talking about a great deal lately, and it's important for a number of reasons. Obviously, it's important economically. When I first decided to run, I was at a forum, and I was talking to a man who just retired as a truck driver, drove 50 years as a truck driver. And he said he probably lost about $1 million because of the quality of the roads that he drove on. Think about how much earlier he could have retired if our roads had been sustainable. I also think, though, that roads and bridges and trains are fantastic things, especially trains, because trains are one of those rare opportunities where you have to sit next to someone you don't know. And that's something that this community needs desperately. Now, in terms of funding it, I need to mention something quite quickly. We actually don't have one of the highest gas tax rates in the country. We're 2 cents below the national average. That is quite an opportunity, I think, for funding. I'm not profoundly in favor of a gas tax, but it's certainly something that we need to explore. And the way that we explore these things is by applying for FAST Act grants. grants. The federal government gives grants to states so that they can explore alternative funding and opportunities for revenue. In Oregon, they applied for a FAST Act grant, and they got a lot of money to try to experiment with a little machine that you put in your car that tells taxation how much you've driven, how many miles you've covered. I'm not saying that that's necessarily the best way to fund transportation, but we need to get resources to find some sort of dedicated way of funding our infrastructure.
Dan.
Well, unfortunately, the state of Minnesota has been lagging in its transportation investments for well over the past 25 years. Now is the time to invest in our systems, not just to maintain, but to enhance them and get them ready for a 21st century infrastructure. We can't afford any more of these Band-Aid, short-term, one-time fixes. We have got to have a comprehensive plan that, yes, fixes roads and bridges, that invests in cost-effective modes of mass transit to meet the growing demand for that. And we also have to make sure we're looking out for our businesses so that we can alleviate the unnecessary time and money wasted because of the congestion. And to do that, we've got to work together, and we've got to keep all options on the table. The gas tax has been mentioned, and that does have a diminishing return as cars get more and more fuel efficient. But again, we have a real crisis here that is decades in the making, and the only way we're going to solve it is if we step outside of our ideological trenches, are willing to work together, and pass a long-term solution.
Jerry.
It's a no-brainer, folks. We got to fix our roads. It's as simple as that. And we have to sit down together and figure out a way to get that done. That being said, we then, and I do tend to agree with Dan on this, we need a long-term plan. The thing that we have to look at is what are the sources of funding and how should they be applied? Should we be doing, as was referred to possibly, a vehicle usage tax that goes by the miles? Well, does that cover, how does that work when we're working with public transportation? I think we have to look at all the options, I agree. But I do believe that funding sources that directly relate to automobile use or road use should be explored. I think the gas tax, as has been pointed out, is not a good thing because it will be a diminishing one, and actually it is quite unstable because as gas prices rise, people drive less. So there's less use of fuel. We have a less stable form of funding. I do think no matter what funding mode we end up with, it must be dedicated. And I agree with Representative Theis. We must have something that is certain, fixed, and dedicated so that it can't be rated down the road. That being said, I guess we have to look at all the options, make careful budget decisions on where we go. I think we need to complete the I-94 corridor here to St. Cloud, and I also would look at a cost-effective way of bringing North Star to St. Cloud.
Stephen.
Politicians the past 4 years have given you all, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to make your roads better. What about you hold them accountable? How many millions of dollars did they spend the past 4 years on reconstruction of the Capitol building? That could have went to transportation, roads, reconstruction of bridges, but they misspent the money and we didn't hold them accountable. Now we're sitting here and people are saying, we'll do this bill or that bill, how about gas tax? You can't trust them. They spent $50 million on a Capitol building and now you want to trust them with your taxes again? That's going to work, really. And the other option that I think that we should be doing is the legalization of marijuana in all forms. Not only would we have money for transportation, you also could use it for school. School can be free if you do that because we'll have enough money. And there's your tuition, it's free, you're going to be happy. Thirdly, it can be used for health care. You could have a Minnesota universal health care which had very low rates for the best quality service. And there's something that will be good for all three sections. So the bottom line is, can you trust people here with your taxes to give you affordable roads and good quality construction? My opinion is you can't. You have to vote right and vote based on someone you can hold accountable. And I'm telling you, you can hold me accountable. If I don't do that, I will resign from the job the next day if I don't do what I tell you. Thank you.
Jim.
Well, we definitely need to put significantly more money into our infrastructure and transportation. We did pass a transportation bill in the last 2 years. In fact, it was the largest bill that we ever did pass. We had some significant things for the St. Cloud community in it. I was proud to have worked to have a significant increase in transit funding for central Minnesota that was in that bill. But we definitely do need to do a lot more. One of the things, though, I also look at is our total level of taxation and money coming in. You know, if you look at the U.S. Census Bureau, they say that we are, on a per capita basis, the 4th highest tax state in the United States. Now, it would seem to me that if we're the 4th highest tax state, we ought to be able to come up with the money for something that is as important as our transportation and infrastructure. And so a couple of ideas that I would bring out. Number one, bonding. That is something that we've traditionally done in the past. We can do more of that. We're in roughly the middle of the pack nationally if you look at bonding. That is something that's available. We do have a state budget surplus, something that we looked at doing this last year that we passed in the House, but then the Senate didn't pass a transportation bill, is to dedicate taxes that are related to transportation to transportation. So the sales tax you pay on auto parts now goes into the general fund, have it go directly to transportation. Sales tax when you lease a car right now goes to the general fund, have it go to transportation. Do things like that. Finally, I do want to say I was the chief author this last year of the bill to extend the North Star Corridor. It went through 2 committees before the governor's commissioners came out against it. We need to push that and the expansion of I-94.
Zach.
Well, the cool part about this question is it asks a little bit more about roads. It asks about infrastructure, the stuff you don't see underneath the ground. A couple years ago, for those around town, you might remember this sort of city just across the river, not this city, dumped several tons of raw sewage into the Mississippi River because of the lack of capacity for water treatment. So infrastructure isn't just roads and bridges, and rails and trails. It is the things you don't see. And it's about water right now. You'll see around here, the city of St. Cloud, we've had to pick up the tab for these immense rainstorms we've had to expand our wastewater, our water runoff things, because streets were flooding because the old, where the water goes through, where they were too small. So we get these big rainstorms, and we're seeing more and more of these, heavier rains. So we need infrastructure that A is going to handle what climate change has brought us. B, we need infrastructure that's going to take you where you need to go without just your car. Because I know there are fewer kids driving and have permits here than there were when I came to school. So that's a trend we need to recognize. And we also need to recognize in order to not just fix roads, but make roads safe, we need long-term dedicated revenue from multiple sources.
Okay, thank you. Our next question. Many families in the St. Cloud area work full-time and live below the poverty line. What should Minnesota do to support those families? And do you support expanding the renter's tax credit? And we will be starting with Zach Dorholt.
Sure. So the renter's rebate. So for anybody who's a renter, in August, you get a renter's rebate credit. For a while, that went away. After I was elected, we brought it back. I remember using that as a student because it came in August. Hey, there's some book money. Awesome. Went straight to books almost every year, which are, as you all know, ridiculously priced. And this is property tax rebates for renters, because renters do pay property taxes through their rent. It goes to the people who own those buildings. This is money that goes directly back into the people's pockets who are going to put that money directly back into the community. They're not sending it overseas. We all have to buy our books locally here. So that's something I was excited to bring back and restore the renter's rebate credit. I also was supported the raise in minimum wage. I'm also a small business owner of a bar and restaurant, so I know exactly how that has an effect on small businesses. And it's still not enough to count on minimum wage as a full-time job. There are enough full-time jobs out there in this area right now. I know so many of us have several friends who work 2 or 3 part-time jobs as their full-time job. And that's not working because then you have lack of health care, you don't get that insurance benefits through your employer, so we need to address that as well, health insurance.
Jim.
Well, this is an area that is of concern to me too. You know, my wife and I have been really active in the charitable community, in this community for a long time. I've been on the board of the Salvation Army here for many years. My wife and I have a fundraiser for their homeless shelter at our home every fall. You know, I certainly am concerned about people who are homeless and are having a hard time making their rent and having a hard time living day to day in the St. Cloud area. However, I'm not sure about the renter's credit being the best way to help those people. You know, the original concept behind the renter's credit was that you looked at the amount of money that the landlord was paying in rent, and then you divided that up by the number of units in the building, and people got back that number as the potential rent credit. That's changed now so that instead of dividing it out, we've just picked a percentage. I think it's 19%, which for most properties is actually more than the landlord pays. But to me, I think rather than having something tied to the rent, which isn't necessarily tied all that much to people's income, as I understand it, and you know how needy they are. Not everyone who rents is poor. I think we'd be better off looking at something like expanding the earned income tax credit. And we actually did that in the bill that we passed in the House this last year. Unfortunately, the governor ended up vetoing it for other reasons. But I see where the questioner is going with this, but I think that there are better routes to be helping people with than the renter's tax credit.
Eric.
The first part of the question, or the last part of the question, I'll treat that initially just to talk about some other things, is that I think, and I could be wrong about this, but I thought that the renter's tax actually had a means test to it, that you couldn't claim it if you had over a certain amount of income. But I do see Jim's point that it doesn't necessarily immediately make people better off in their conditions. However, I would still, even as a landlord myself, I still would support the perpetuation of the renter's credit. But when it comes to poverty, that's a much bigger question. It's not exclusively an issue of housing, although that's a really significant part of it. Housing is again, like I said, a really big part of it. It's not the whole thing. Poverty is profoundly disturbing, especially in this area. Depending on the report that you read, you know, there's a 2014 economic report that said 26% of the kids under 5 in St. Cloud lived in poverty. That's just unacceptable. That is completely, fundamentally unacceptable. When you think of kids under 5, 1 in poverty is too many. So when I think of poverty, that's where I go. That's the population that I think of. And so I think we need things like greater investments in education, in pre-K, to get people out of their current conditions. Potentially summer school, so kids have stuff to eat all the summers. Kids in poverty have some stuff to eat. Is something else that I think we should look into. But fundamentally, I think one thing that would be great is to take some of the burden off of government and to invest more in nonprofits and to coordinate the work of nonprofits so that they can better serve the needs of the indigent.
Tama.
I don't want to say that I'm for or against a renter's credit because I think there's a lot of pieces to it and I'd like to get a better picture of what exactly somebody is looking for. So this is one time I'd say, I'd like to know what you think. Is that really something we should be looking at? Is it really that helpful? Those are some things that I would want to know. I believe education is where we can help a lot of folks because I know a lot of companies are willing to educate, train on the job in order to get people to take the jobs that they have open. I look at that as a big resource because not only are you working, but you're also getting your education. I think if we really expand the opportunities for that to happen in this community, we just create this wonderful win-win situation. Thank you.
Jerry.
Just a quick comment on the renter's credit. This was originally based on the concept that allowed people who owned property, individual property owners, to get a rebate on their property taxes. Well, if you're a renter, you don't own the property, so you don't have any tax to get a rebate on it. That's how this was originated. And I'm assuming, I was not familiar with exactly how it was reinstated or the formula, but I believe that's how it still works. But I want to talk about this in a broader sense. We want to get people out of poverty. How do you get people out of poverty? You give them good jobs so that they can earn more money. You give them the opportunity to better themselves. You do this through several things. First of all, and foremost, we need a solid education system that takes very young people, gives them the education so they have the skills to read, write, and do math, so that they can then learn the better job skills. We need a system that marries children to, I shouldn't say marries children, but it brings children into this, my mistake, brings children into the system by allowing them to be exposed to various vocations, starting at 6th, 7th, 8th grade. Let them go out and work at Menards maybe and see if they like retail. Let them work in a machine shop, see if they like doing that. And then start building a program in the schools that gets them an advanced start on those skills so that when they graduate from high school, not only can they read, write, and do arithmetic, but they also have some basic skills that will allow them to go to technical colleges or to the university to get the jobs, the good jobs that will bring them out of poverty.
Stephen.
Unemployment, let's talk about that first. When unemployment is down, when people have more jobs, we can negotiate our salary, we can negotiate our benefits. When unemployment is up and we can't get jobs, it's a systematic oppression to where they make it so we can't negotiate. That's the first thing. Second thing, I'm gonna need to pick on one person, and it's not picking on you, but to ask a question, sir, it's just a yes or no. At your last job, if they gave you the job, did they ask you, do you want to be paid like a white male or the salary of an African-American male?
Of course not.
No. So that's the problem, because we have different pay scales for a white person and a black person. And then it's even worse for African-American women when compared to white women. So when we talk about unemployment, poverty, we also need to talk about systematic oppression, racism. And it's frightening when none of us brought that up yet until now. When we talk about these bills or that bill, sure, it might work, but mentally, where are we? Mentality-wise, are living in a place, in a mindset to where we're okay with giving someone who's African-American descent the same salary as a white man? The answer is no, white people aren't ready for that, and they haven't been, and it would have shown by now. The third thing that you have to understand is that the taxes that we get put on us, income tax, for example, and other things, when you work, let's say 30 hours a week to 40 hours a week, they take 7 hours of your paycheck away from you.
Okay, thank you. The next question. If elected...
You forgot to answer.
Oh, I am so sorry. I'm right
That's
here.
all right.
Dan.
Well, the amount of poverty that we have here in St. Cloud is absolutely unexcusable. Poverty and particularly homelessness with children and people, it's something that I see a lot. Nicole and Lily and I volunteer for a homeless sheltering program called the Church of the Week, where the church provides overflow shelter for the winter months, and we've got to do something about it, and it especially hits me personally. As a realtor, affordable housing and access to good housing is a personal priority of mine. So absolutely, I would support the work done by Representative Dorholt to support the renter's tax rebate. That'll help with make sure that more people can have more access to affordable housing. I want to echo what Eric said about making sure that the achievement gap starts and the discrepancies that we have start with education on day one. So we've got to make sure we're investing in pre-K. The best way to get people out of poverty is to give them a job. And so I would support legislation to help create jobs. One specific one that I've looked into is the Minnesota Investment and Job Creation Fund, which the last 3 years has appropriated $110 million to create vitally important jobs across the state. And one thing that I also want to make note of is absolutely, there are so many people of color who are left behind and that have experiencing double-digit unemployment rates throughout the state. We've got to work with businesses and as a legislator and community members to tackle that as well.
Thank you. The next question, if elected, how do you plan to address the issues of Islamophobia in our community? And we are going to start with Dan Wolgamott.
Well, I'm a very, very big believer in our nation's motto, E pluribus unum. Out of many, we are one. And that has to hold true in all levels of our community, in our schools, in our places of employment. We've got to make sure that as leaders, that we are welcoming and that we are inclusive. And so we need to do everything that we can through legislation to make sure that we are upholding those values that are so important to our nation. It's something that I, on a regular basis, go have lunch with my daughter Lily, and it's the lunchroom table in the 4th grade is quite an experience, but it just is so inspiring to me how you know, all the problems and things that we have as adults with racism, with fear, and all these things, you know, the kids just don't worry about that, and I think we need to take that same mindset and make sure that as leaders we are welcoming, we are inclusive, that holds up with the language that we use in our campaigns, that holds up with the people that we support for offices. I'm very disappointed with all the rhetoric from Donald Trump that I don't think contributes to building community, and I hope that as public officials and all of us here in our community, we can be welcoming and inclusive.
Stephen.
This topic is really important to me, just not only as a person, but because I am Muslim. I became Muslim in South Africa in 2010 and have been since. So this problem that we have, which is not only a problem, but it's a serious issue. I hate it when people say it's a misunderstanding. It's not a misunderstanding when a Somali American gets kidnapped for 4 days and beaten almost to death in St. Cloud not that many years ago. So it's a very serious issue. The first thing, we need to replicate what Canada did. I'm not sure if many of you know, but Canada, they did an academic program to where the lessons are throughout the whole year, to where a lesson about Islam could be 2-3 weeks long, to where kids learn about what was it like when Muslims came to America before Columbus. Because yes, Muslims were here long before Columbus. That's a stereotype for certain people who believe it. So that's the first thing that we need to do. Academic week-long lessons, not just let's celebrate one day to where we get Muslim food and Muslim garbs and put it on a table. That doesn't teach anyone, doesn't educate anyone. It's a terrible system. The second thing is understand tokens. A lot of people like to bring up, well, Muhammad Ali was Muslim, you guys are doing fine. Muhammad Ali doesn't make up for how many times of Islamophobic events in St. Cloud. Every week, Muslim masjids, mosques, establishments get vandalized. So we have to hold people accountable. We have to make sure that they do get sentenced and get found guilty, not just get off because of white privilege or whatever good lawyer they have. So accountability and academic differences we need to make.
Tama Theis.
I'm not really sure how to answer that, because as a legislator, what can I do? I don't know. I think it comes from how we act and what we expect and the bills we carry. I don't look at my constituency as this group or that group. I look at it as my constituency. And so I take time to learn about everyone, whatever events are out there. I try to be as present as I can to find out what's going on. And I think if more of us show that responsibility and get out there and do it, we learn more about each other. I think holding different community events where we have a chance to dialogue about what makes us different, but also what makes us the same. What do we have in common? And I think too often people get so stuck into the differences, they don't see that we really aren't sometimes that much apart. So what I would like to do is to see that, and again, this comes from the community, this comes from what I hold dear, is just making sure that we treat people the way we'd like to be treated. I know it sounds really simplistic, but truly I think a lot of it has to do with how we approach things. I love information, I love to learn, and I think that's a huge part of how we present ourselves to our community.
Zach.
A couple years ago, about a year and a half ago, I attended a rally, which was countering some folks who had come to St. Cloud to perpetuate fear and hate. And it was intense. To the point where there was people yelling and shouting at us who were rallying in support of our Muslim friends and neighbors. And the greatest moment of courage I saw there was simply an act of love. A couple of very angry older men just getting in the faces of us in the rally. And my friend Hassan Youssef just walked up to the guy and gave him a hug. He says, "I love you, man." It was as simple as that in that moment. But we have to press rewind here, because those moments are happening so often because candidates on the national and the state stage are perpetuating fear, hate, and anger, and that is completely irresponsible. So A, we don't support those candidates. And the other one is back to the education piece. When I had K-12 education, I remember in high school taking a class, whether it was social studies or something, where we actually learned about the 7 pillars of Islam. And I got to college, and I automatically assumed that everybody else had too. And I found that wasn't the truth. So making this part of our core curriculum so that people understand that A, love is the law, and you can find that in just about every religion. If we can get that in the schools, that'd be great.
Jim.
Well, since being elected, and even before being elected, I've really tried to reach out to the Somali community and the Muslim community in the St. Cloud area here. And I count a number of Somalis and Muslims as my friends. And I believe I've done a lot in the legislature over the last couple of years to try to help them and deal with some of the issues that they're facing. One of the major ones is we had a Department of Human Rights in St. Cloud that was down to being staffed by one person 1 day per month. And you know, there is discrimination, and there's way more work to be done than can be done 1 day by one person per month. And so I got the funding this last year in the supplemental budget that I was the author of to have 2 full-time people there, and they're in the process of hiring those people now, and I think that's going to be a good resource for people who are facing discrimination in whatever arena to be able to get some help. I was involved in getting funding for the St. Cloud Somali Youth Organization here, a grant for them for younger children to be able to have some youth outlets, some outlets for them. I was named actually as the co-chair of the Economic Disparities Working Group down at the legislature this year, and out of that came a $35 million economic development package that's targeted to minorities and trying to improve their economic prospects. And so I could go on and talk about some other things I've been involved in, but I do believe that we've made some progress in this area this year, and I'm glad to have been involved in it, and we need to do more.
Jerry.
Thought you'd forgotten about us down here. I want to say 2 things about the issue. It's very simple. Conversation and compassion. 2 days ago, I took part, actually maybe it was yesterday morning, things blend together. I took part in a conversation on race. And this is something that Mayor Theis has really promoted, and I applaud him for all of the efforts that he has done along with Chief Blair Anderson and the rest of this city to try and make a community for everybody. And I think we had a perfect example of how that is succeeding in the incident that occurred and the aftermath about a month ago. Our community came together. There was very little in the way of rhetoric. Everybody, the leaders from all sides stepped forward and said, this is not St. Cloud. This is not what we are about. So I go back to the idea, there is a program called Marnita's Table, where people from different ethnic backgrounds sit down, have a meal, and have a conversation. And they get to know each other. They get to understand each other. That's the conversation part. The compassion part is to understand everybody's difficulties and try to understand each other's cultures and to live with those and to become a single harmonious community.
Eric.
So here's the thing. If you wake up early in the morning, you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, today's a great day to be a racist, you're not voting for me. Google my past, my history, my scholarship, it's pretty clear. I've spent years and years doing anti-racism pedagogy, teaching against racism for years and years and years. I do it in the public schools. I teach our teachers how to teach against racism. That's what I do. This issue is one of the reasons why I'm running. It's something that drives me, not just in politics, but it drives me in life more generally. And I think that when we approach this issue, there are a couple different things for us to realize. One is that not many people do wake up and say, what a great day to be a racist. Most people are good people, especially the people in central Minnesota. I had a conversation at a door just last week where a woman was talking to me about the crossroads. And at the beginning of the conversation, she was talking about how much it hurt her because she was starting to think that she was a racist. She was almost in tears at the end of our conversation because the way she was talking about her experiences made her feel like she was a racist. The way that we solve that problem, the way we deal with those feelings is through education and through leadership. And we have neither of those adequately right now. Leadership has two parts at least. One has to do with policies. The other has to do with public statements, with taking a stand, with public advocacy. So in my mind, to solve this problem, there are two things. In policies, I want to reinvest in education so we have anti-bullying education, so that we have more counselors in the schools to talk about issues of cultural diversity and mental health. I'm on the vice chair of a board of a nonprofit that deals with mental health counseling to deal with issues of racism. Sorry, I'm looking at that time. Am I done? Tone down. Sorry, just really quickly, to me that last part is equally important. We need leaders who stand up and say things publicly about who we can and should be.
Okay. Our next question. How can we provide more opportunities for economic growth in central Minnesota? And we will be starting with Eric.
You know, the way the question is phrased, I think, is fantastic, because we're talking about economic growth in central Minnesota. I think too often when we talk about taxes and business concerns, we think about just cutting taxes across the board as if it's some sort of magical accomplishment. We don't think critically enough about differences in the varieties of businesses that serve us. Small businesses employ our kids. Small businesses stay here. Small businesses keep their resources here. We need to find ways to focus on small businesses and not on Target. The other thing to realize is that tax cuts in and of themselves actually have a very complicated relationship with economic growth. And I was talking with my friend Mark Geller a couple weeks ago. And he said that his small business is doing really well, but he can't find people to work the job. And there's a really interesting relationship there between taxes. We think we've got to keep them low, but we need schools to educate the people to do the job. So for me, the answer is not some across-the-board, easy answer of tax cuts and lesser regulations, because those things are there for a reason. Instead, I think we need targeted investments in small businesses. We need workforce grants so that small businesses can train people to work in them. We need to enable grants for innovation and infrastructure so that that small business that wants to grow can get a new machine to grow as rapidly as they can. In my estimation, those are just a couple of very small things that we can
Jerry.
I'm going to relate a little story. Most of you probably know that, or maybe don't know, that I was the owner of a small business, Lake Master Lake Maps. But I want to go back a little ways to about 1986, when the Central Minnesota Initiative Foundation was put together with a grant from, I can't even remember who now. And I helped some of the work being done to promote that organization. That organization made low-cost grants or loans to small businesses to help them get started, to give them seed money. About 15 years later, when I started my business, Lake Master, the Initiative Foundation helped fund my business. This is a wonderful use of recycled money. Loans are given to businesses, they're repaid, and they're put back into businesses. So I think that this is an example of a program that we can use to bring business to this community. I agree with the second comment about education. We need a skilled and trained workforce. If we have a skilled and trained workforce, businesses are going to be more likely to come here. I do want to talk about taxes and regulations just briefly. Minnesota is a very uncomfortable place right now for small businesses. Regulations and taxes do inhibit the growth of businesses in this state. More are leaving or are going out of business than are being created right now. We need to change that.
Jim Knoblach.
Well, I could talk about the tax climate, and that is an issue, but I do believe that the regulatory climate is every bit as big an issue in inhibiting the development of businesses, the start of small businesses, the growing of businesses as the state's tax climate. I'll give you an example. Is out in Cold Spring, we've had an issue for the last few years where you have the Cold Spring Brewery, which is next to it's a stream, but it's really more of a ditch that runs through town, and it's probably about as wide as this table, maybe just a little bit wider. It's not exactly your pristine, clear flowing stream, but a number of years, so the story goes, the DNR stocked some trout in it. I'm not sure, there's very few trout there, but there are still some, and it's been declared a trout stream, and because of that, the DNR said that the brewery was in danger of shutting down, and people were in danger of losing their jobs and not being able to expand because the water being drawn was warming up the trout stream. Well, we were able to broker a solution this last year where they're now going to be getting their water from a different place, and we've, I think, satisfied the DNR. But it's an example of where we almost lost this business because of the regulatory climate, and we had to pass special legislation in order to save it. And we really do overregulate businesses in this state, and I think that we can achieve the things we need to achieve without having as difficult of a regulatory climate as we do, and that's one thing we need to do to spur business growth in our area.
Tama, Theis.
I would say that the biggest part, and like I said before, my husband and I had a remodeling and construction company for 30 years, and we still have businesses, but that was our bigger one. It is a lot of education, it is regulation, it is the fees and taxes that you need to pay, and I'm going to jump around because there's no easy way to make it all go together. But when you get licensed, there's the continuing education piece of it. A lot of times it gets to be repetitive. After 20 years of taking continuing education classes, they've changed what they think the focus should be. They didn't want to see any classes in how to run your business, yet that's why most people quit being in business. They don't know how to run a business. So I think there's a disconnect in some of what the regulations are and what the needs are. And so if you're going to make me take continuing education, make it worth my time, make it something that I can walk out of there and say, yeah, the state wants me to really do well. Another thing is, I got my list here, just the cost of doing business. It is expensive. When we look at the burdens that employers have to pay just to have employees. Not only are you paying a wage, but you're also paying insurance and taxes. It's a lot. It's a lot of money. And if we could find a way to maybe work together with folks to find out what they feel a reasonable amount would be, I think we would do a better job of making those partnerships to keep people in business.
Zach Dorholt.
So we're talking about jobs here, Central Minnesota, St. Cloud. All you really need to do is read the quarterly business report that comes out of, yes, I'm going to name drop, King Banyan's office here. It's done, research done right here at St. Cloud State University, the Economic Development Center. I got to do a little stint there as an undergrad. They do surveys quarterly of all the local area businesses. Time after time, most recently, the #1 need is those educated, qualified workers. So if we want a vibrant economic force here, we need all of you students to stay in town, okay? Don't leave. And two, when it comes to being a small business, a real small business owner myself, this little restaurant is a tavern, actually. I know where small, targeted tax breaks make a difference and work. Had it not been for some leftover grants from the federal government, along with the city, I don't know, honestly, if we would have been able to start up. They helped us with some initial startup fees. We were 4 guys with a dream. It was 2010. Try imagining knocking on a bank's door in 2010 saying you're going to open up a restaurant. Nobody was listening. But we knew if we built it, they would come. But if it hadn't been for help at the local level, with targeted tax breaks, not breaks for billionaires, we would not have been able to get off the ground as easily. So we can do smart investments like that and do everything we can to keep our smart folks here in town.
Dan.
Well, small businesses are the backbone of our state's economy. I get to see that every day through my real estate business. I'm a member of our local Chamber of Commerce. And so I know from my conversations I've had with fellow chamber members that it's important as a state that we come together as both parties and work to eliminate red tape for our businesses. For example, I support the upfront sales tax exemption for business equipment. As a realtor, I deal with businesses and property taxes on a daily basis. I support tax relief for property taxes for small businesses. Another thing we can do to make Minnesota more economically competitive is support the Minnesota Trade Office, which is really exciting and acts as a conduit for businesses who are looking to expand their sales in other countries. I also want to echo what I think it was Eric said about making sure that that our businesses have a highly educated and well-trained workforce. So again, I've already mentioned the pipeline program and other ways that partner our colleges and universities and high schools with businesses. But yeah, absolutely, our small businesses are vitally important to our state's economy, and I'm welcome working with both parties to support them in the legislature.
Stephen.
For economic growth, I think of 3 ways we can really improve St. Cloud and Minnesota. The first is a business tax, like many people here said. It's about 9.8%, so businesses don't want to come to Minnesota at all. We can cut that in half, by at least half, and then we'll have more jobs because businesses want to come here. The second way, a lot of people don't think about this, but the war on drugs in Minnesota does a lot. Not only does it take away money and revenue that the state gets if, well, drugs are sold, but by taking away those people, then we take away the money that we can use, whether it's illegal or not. The third way, I would say, to tell a story, let's say Jimmy came back from the war in Afghanistan and he has PTSD. And he doesn't do well, and you know, the marijuana capsules don't work really well, but he's crap out of luck. He can't get much help because the capsules don't work, and you know, the other medications don't take away PTSD. There's not really surgeries. And the answer is legalization of marijuana in all forms. It's been found not only to help cure cancer, several other diseases, several other psychological, I would say, states of mind. It's helped repel emotions and symptoms. That's definitely a way that we can keep up economic growth, not only through businesses that can sell medical marijuana, but it also would make it so people who don't know, it does lessen crime and decrease crime in areas of neighborhoods and so on. So it has a multifaceted tool.
Okay, thank you all. We have reached the end of our time for questions. I'm really sorry I wasn't able to give you a last question warning, so I apologize. So we will now go on to closing remarks from the candidates, and we are going to start with Dan Wolgamott.
Well, I want to specifically reach out to each of the students that took time to come here tonight. I know you've got a lot on your plates with studies and papers and all these other things, but I really appreciate you taking the initiative to be here tonight and to be informed, and want you to know that you have a very exciting opportunity coming up. With your vote, you have a very powerful voice. And as I've learned from the hundreds of conversations I've had with students in the dorms and apartments over the past few months, you know better than any of us the unique challenges that are facing us here in Minnesota in the 21st century. So I hope that I appreciate each of you respecting your vote enough to be here and be informed. And we have all these challenges. We've got to come together. We've got to move on from the negative, name-calling politics of old, and we need to elect a leader who's going to bring positive energy to the process, who will work hard to reach out and listen. That's why I'm running for the Senate, and I respectfully ask for your vote.
Zach Dorholt.
First of all, thank you, Tama, for the cough drop. It's talking about the future belongs to those who show up. So thank you for being here. As a student here myself, a former student, I feel like I never left. This place is home. It's a better university than the one I graduated from. And that is good, because that means my degree is worth more too, right? And I want to keep it that way. We do that when we send people down to the legislature who are able to bring forth a broad spectrum of views to the table. On one hand, I'm part owner of a small business, bar and restaurant, one of the most tax-regulated industries out there. On the other hand, my full-time job, my career, I'm a counselor at a nonprofit mental health center where I work with folks who live with serious and persistent mental illness. Some come right off the street or right out of the hospital. If elected, I may be actually the only active healthcare professional out of the entire 201 legislative body. So that's expertise that's sorely lacking. And I'd like to be that expert and friend in St. Paul for you.
Eric Putnam.
I really like what Zach just said about the future belonging to those who show up. I think that's pretty cool. From my perspective, when I think about why I'm running and what I can bring to this office, I think that we have a very serious need to renew our civic culture, to come to a better understanding of what it means to be a citizen and someone who lives here in St. Cloud. I think about how many doors I've knocked where the first thing that someone said that, well, who cares? Why does it matter? Or I'm sick of it all. There's too much of that cynicism in the world. When I first told my daughter that I was going to run for office, my wife's a principal at Kennedy Community School in St. Joe. So I asked my daughter if I could run for office. And she's 12. And she said, but Dad, you'll have to talk to people. And people suck. And I thought, you're 12. But we're all kind of, I think, stuck in a bit of cynicism. And cynicism is the beginning of nothing. It can only be an end. And I think that we need to renew our civic culture and participate in public life. And I ask for your support.
Jim Knoblach.
Well, first of all, thanks again for coming today. Thanks to the League for putting this on. One of the things we haven't talked about much is the difficulty of getting things done down in St. Paul. And frankly, the vitriol between the different parties and the bad feelings that you see so much of. And I think something that I bring to the equation is a past record and a recognized ability of actually getting things done in St. Paul. This last year, for example, the only major finance bill that passed and became law was the supplemental budget bill that I was the author of in the House. On the Republican side, I was able to negotiate with my Democrat counterpart in the Senate. I was able to work with the governor's office. We were able to put together a bill that satisfied everyone and passed and became law. The Pioneer Press newspaper rated me as being the most independent, bipartisan Republican of any Republican down in the legislature if you looked at our voting record over the last 2 years. I'm someone who's not afraid to work with the other party, who's not afraid to reach across the aisle, who recognizes that everyone's got good ideas. And I ask you to send me back so I can continue to be a bridge to accomplishing things for our community.
Tama, Theis.
Thank you for being here tonight. It really does make a difference when we get to see the people actively listening to what we think should be done. We don't learn unless you speak up, and it's always it truly is a joy when people come down to St. Paul and see us and say, hey, this is important to me. I enjoy that interaction, and I don't care what the issue is. It's always interesting to have that dialogue. I love what I'm doing. I love serving my community. My community is my priority. It doesn't matter what project it is. When my son was, youngest son was in high school, he worked, actually he was one of the first, he was the first president of the St. Cloud Youth Council. And his project was a skate park. And so you'd see me a lot at skate parks. It was fun. It was really interesting getting to know a lot of different people. And that's what I enjoyed about this job. It's really not even a job because I really enjoy what I'm doing most of the time, not usually at 4 o'clock in the morning. But I really appreciate the fact that I have been trusted to do this job, and I will continue to do the best job that I can. Thank you.
Stephen Zilberg.
I'm not good at flattery, so I'm going to try to be honest as much as possible here. We had a same forum at St. Cloud Times. I'm not sure if you watched that. I'm going to repeat the same thing I said there because I think college students here will get the picture. I said that there's 7 candidates, all of us, including myself, and I asked them, do you see any diversity whatsoever? The answer is we have 6 European, Caucasian, probably Christian individuals and 1 female. That's not diversity at all. You're part of the European descent, I was doing. But we have no diversity at all. Okay? The only diversity I can think of is myself, who, when they brought up Islamophobia, I have an inside view on that. Also, an inside view on what the war on drugs does and happens to people, what guns have to do in neighborhoods, how it affects people. And so I think when you come to do with a voice at the Capitol, nothing's getting done because there's no diversity. You have people who are all from the same background, mostly, except Ilhan and Keith Ellison, which are tokens at the end of the day if you bring them up.
Jerry Relph.
Well, I also thank you all for being here. I want just a couple of thoughts. First of all, I spent 30 years of my life as an attorney trying to bring people together who didn't even want to be in the same room. And so I learned a few things about trying to bridge the gap, to get along with people. I think it's important to recognize that nobody has a monopoly on ideas. The first thing we have to do is accept that fact and listen. Listen to what the people tell you. Listen to the ideas of your fellow legislators. Test those ideas. Take them to their logical conclusion. And if it's a good idea, then let's get behind it. And I believe I can do that. I do want to make one short comment about the negativism that's going on here in this campaign. The major parties, and I'll use the S, have been producing negative ads. I've been the target of several scurrilous, absolutely untrue ads that have emanated from the opposing party. I don't think that's a way to build bridges once we get to the legislature. I just want to say that that is not a positive campaign in my estimation. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. Okay, so thank you, audience members, for asking questions and for your cooperation. Thank you to each of the candidates for running for office and for participating in this forum. Thank you, American Democracy Project members, for sponsoring this forum and for making the arrangements. Thank you, St. Cloud State University, for providing this venue and supporting civic engagement. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates, not those of the sponsor. Sponsorship of this forum is not an endorsement by the sponsor of any candidates. Additional information about the election and voting is available from the League of Women Voters on the table in this room. Information from the candidates is available on the table outside this room. Now it's up to you. I hope you continue to become informed about candidates and issues. Let your voices be heard by voting, either by absentee ballot or on election day. Thank you again, candidates, and good luck on November 8th. And this is our time.